serious and important way. Ambassador Paul Bremer, he was chairman of the National Commission on Terrorism, and two former United States senators, Republican Warren Rudman, Democrat Gary Hart. They were co-chairs of the U.S. Commission on National Security. Senator Hart, let me start with you. Your commission's conclusions were eerie, sobering, prescient. America will become increasingly vulnerable to hostile attack on our own homeland, and our military superiority will not entirely protect us. Americans will likely die on American soil, possibly in large numbers. That's exactly what happened. What do we do now to try to do as much as we can to make sure something like this doesn't happen again?
Our commission strongly believes that our government should create a national homeland security agency, and that term is a very, very important one with substantive meaning, and that Congress should reorganize itself in accordance with that reorganization of the federal protection assets for our homeland so that it can better cope with the problems that this country is now going to face. The difference between an office and an agency is an office is a coordinating, urging kind of mechanism with no statutory authority and no budgetary authority, and therefore can only hope that other departments of the government scattered all over the place will cooperate. We found that didn't work with the energy crisis in the 70s. Many people believe it's not working with drugs today. We strongly believe that the border assets, particularly of Coast Guard, Customs, and Border Patrol, be brought under the jurisdiction of a new agency head created by Congress with budgetary authority.
Senator Rudman, your co-chair, Senator Hart, couldn't put it more crisply and clearly. Tom Ridge, the governor of Pennsylvania, has been asked by George W. Bush to join this fight against terrorism. What must he get from the president in order to do his job in a serious, substantive way?
Well, Tim, first let me say, I certainly applaud what the president's done. It's a very good first step. I mean, they are recognizing they have to start pulling this together. But it will not come together, in our view, long term without the things Gary has spoken of. In addition to what Gary spoke of, we take FEMA and put it essentially into that same agency. Now, that is what you call the protection part of this whole problem. There's three problems. There's prevention, which is intelligence. There's protection, which is what we're talking about now. And there's response, which also would be part of this agency. The first responders all over the country have to be the local folks. They have to be well trained. They have to have the help of the National Guard, which we believe ought to be trained in this as well. And you need strong liaison with the Department of Defense. I mean, if it's not a statute, if it's not a cabinet level agency with a cabinet officer that has clout, well, no matter how good Tom Ridge has a relationship with the president, and he has a great one, we don't think long-term it's the way to go. But we're not being critical. I mean, the president had to do something. He did what was available to him by executive order. In my sense, from talking to people on the Hill, this is probably a work in progress.
So in a constructive way, what you're suggesting strongly is that Tom Ridge have line authority.
Correct.
He have budgetary responsibility for people who are involved in this fight against terrorism.
Right, and for instance, the Coast Guard would still be the Coast Guard. It would still have its identical structure. The only thing, it would not report to the Secretary of Transportation, it would report to the Secretary for Homeland Defense.
Ambassador Bremer, let me talk to you about your report. Terrorists attack American targets more often than those of any other country. America's preeminent role in the world guarantees this will continue to be the case. And you go on, as the World Trade Center bombing demonstrated, that's the one in '93 you were talking about, we cannot rely solely on existing border controls and procedures to keep foreign terrorists out of the United States. In the 90s, a terrorist incident was almost 20% more likely to result in death or injury than an incident 2 decades ago. The World Trade Center bombing in New York in '93 killed 6, wounded 1,000, but the terrorist goal was to topple the Twin Towers, killing tens of thousands. They did it.
Yeah, they sure did. The attack on September 11th really was a culmination of a long-range trend during the 1990s, a change in the tactics of terrorism, which reflected a change in the motives. The motives during the 1990s, and this is not a secret to anybody who's been studying terrorism, shifted away from narrow political goals to more ideological, religious, apocalyptic goals, goals of revenge or simple hatred. And that in turn meant that terrorists were willing to inflict mass casualties, and as both of our reports pointed out, it was only a matter of time when this happened inside the United States.
Terrorists in the 60s and 70s were sensitive to their own political agenda and ideology and wanted to avoid, in large part, mass killings because they didn't want to turn people against their campaign.
Their goal was to kill enough people to get the cameras there and the press attention, but not so many that the public at large would be turned off. As one terrorist expert put it, in the 70s they were trying to get a place at the table. They wanted to start a negotiation, let our people go, change this policy or that. In the 1990s it changed to let's turn over the table and kill everybody there.
Senator Hart, in terms of our immigration policy, how do we put something in place that continues America's policy of being open and free and inviting to people who want to come here and start a new life, and yet have the necessary protections that make sure that people who don't have good intentions for us are kept out?
Well, the short answer, of course, is very carefully. It's not just people, it's equipment as well. One of the things we discovered working with experts in the Coast Guard and other agencies was about 1.3 to 1.5 million people cross our borders every day. 58 to 60,000 shipping containers, 340 or 50,000 vehicles cross our borders, and our border agencies inspect something like 2 or 3% tops of all of those shipments. And the people get closer scrutiny, obviously, but a lot are falling between the cracks. That's one of the reasons why we think reorganization of the government's protection assets, including those 3 uniform Border Patrol agencies, is absolutely imperative to close the gaps and seal up the seams that presently exist in our system. People are dropping between the cracks. We are putting people on watch lists and then losing them, and that simply can't go on. Obviously, the FBI has a very critical role to play in this as well. There is no short answer to your question, unfortunately. It's we'll probably end up to some degree, yet undetermined, reducing our reliance on international commerce. Now, that's obviously going to be on the margin, not substantially, but I don't see how else to do closer inspection of shipments and vehicles and closer identification of people without slowing up this process and doing it right.